Hey, what's up? All right, so continuing along, hey, the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. What a awesome time yesterday with the fire Brigham for Chaf Be Shavat and the questions we were able to get answered and the life we were able to learn about and the things that we're able to apply in our life and the wonderful lessons about uh, the Rebbitzin. And let us continue along here. We left off in Parshas Mishpatim. And let's pick up right here. Faith does not exclude intellect. So yesterday we were talking about these three different kinds of the mitzvahs, the edis, which are the mitzvahs whose rationale can be grasped by our minds, the hukim, whose rationale can they do not have the rationale that can be grasped by the human mind. And mishpatim are these categories of mitzvah. He said even human logic mandates, the thought processes that we'd learned modesty from a cat, chas v'shalom, and other lessons of the like. So we continue along number 2, page 325, Sichos in English. It goes on to say, true, our sages state here in the Perkei Avos in the first chapter, 17th Mishnah, deed is most essential, emphasizing that the actual observance of the mitzvah is of fundamental importance. I always dedicate the learning and honor of my brother Theodore Jason Ben Homer Doler, and grateful to have a place to record today. I was leaving Shul this morning. I got there a little bit late, mamish, but I at least passed through. But thank God we have a place that we can daven. But I wasn't able to quite like get set up, and once I had got set up, it's not quite my machem, you know what I'm saying? So my space. So I'm grateful for the space and those who are providing that space. May you be greatly blessed. So the sages are saying in Perkei Avos that this deed is the most essential, emphasizing that the actual observance of a mitzvah is of fundamental importance. And those who don't have a space yet, or you're trying to find your place, may God guide you to there, and may everything inside of you be received and revealed, so that you can be in your right spot. And the hard thing about having a tough spot is you got to go there. Rabbi Levertov told me a long time ago. He said, "You laid your hay, now you made your hay, now you gotta lay." So, and Baruch Hashem, where we lay our hay is where we're supposed to be. So l'chaim, l'chaim. Yesterday's portion, when I said we got the espresso, well, I didn't even get to this yesterday. Trying to still get it down, and that's how God does our blessings. Sometimes he line it up for you before, and sometimes we have so much blessing that we can't even begin to get to it sometime until the next day. So continuing right along here, this idea that the deed is most essential, emphasizing that the actual observance of the mitzvah is of fundamental importance. For example, with regard to the mitzvah of tefillin, the fluorescerites, the boxes, and the entire Torah is equated with tefillin, according to Kedushin 35a, where a person to have in mind all the spiritual intentions associated with the mitzvah, but fail to actually bind tefillin to his head and arm, he has not performed the mitzvah and is considered in the category of a skull on which the tefillin have not been placed, according to Rosh Hashanah 17a. If, by contrast, a person were to put on tefillin even without considering the intent of the mitzvah, he fulfills the mitzvah, which is quite interesting, huh? This applies even when a person is advanced enough to be capable of focusing his intent, yet fails to do so. Although he fulfills the mitzvah in a perfunctory manner, he still must recite a blessing beforehand and mention God's name and his sovereignty. And it's saying, to borrow the wording of the Egeris HaKadosh, chapter 11, and the blessing that must be recited without a doubt or a shadow of a doubt. The lack of higher intention does not detract from the fact that the mitzvah has been observed. The same applies with regard to other mitzvahs, because the deed is most essential. Nevertheless, the emphasis on the deed is not meant to exclude thought or feeling. On the contrary, God's will is that the mitzvahs permeate every dimension of our character, encompassing all the potentials which we possess. Based on the above, we can understand why a person involved in the performance of one mitzvah is free from the obligation to perform another, whatever mitzvah is might be. Okay, according to Sukkah 25a and Tosafos, for example, a person returning a lost object is not obligated to give charity at that moment, is the point being brought down. A mitzvah should not only affect one's powers of action and speech, but also one's powers of thought, emotion, and intellect, and even the encompassing powers of will and pleasure. All these powers are to be permeated by God's mitzvahs. Moreover, this does not apply only to those mitzvahs which are of a general nature and fundamentally depend on the feelings of our hearts and our powers of comprehension. For example, the mitzvahs of love, fear, faith in God, knowledge of God, and the like. Instead, our mitzvahs, even those entirely dependent on action, must permeate every aspect of our personalities, including our deepest potentials, including and especially that of inner heartfelt pleasure. Indeed, every mitzvah, whichever it might be, must be observed with happiness and joy. And we learn that in Rambam Mishnah Torah, the conclusion of Hilkos Lulav. Very interesting how joyous we should be with the Lulav, as alluded to in the verse Vayikra 3:16. And other places said that this verse serves as an analogy, teaching that pleasure, our deepest and most choice potential, must be dedicated to God. This year, inside of the Sukkah, we learned that during the festival of Sukkot, the Sukkahs that we mamish walk a tefakim or 2 or 3 off of the ground. How is it that we are able to walk a few tefachim off of the ground in this time of auspicious blessedness and Sichos in the festival of Sukkot? That's by the fact that on the first day that we go to the sukkah, the first thing in the morning, and by reciting the bracha, the blessing on the lulav and the esrog, then by this action for the whole Sukkot, then we are raised a few tefakim off the ground. Back inside here, Baruch Hashem here, all the choice parts should be given to God on page 326 accordingly, since their observance is mandated by the Torah, the Chukim, the ones that do not have a rational that can be grasped by the human mind, this Chuk, in addition to the Mishpatim, the ones that have a general idea and mandated by human logic, and perhaps that we would do even if it wasn't completely a mitzvah, must be fulfilled not only with our powers of action, but the importance of their observance must resonate within our minds. They should not be regarded as mere imperatives observed because we have no choice. We should not feel that since God issued a decree, we must carry it out, even when it appears to be without reason or purpose. Instead, the mitzvahs must permeate every dimension of our being and all of our soul powers. Since God gave these commandments, even the chukim should be internalized and made a part of our thought processes. These things that kind of are outside of the human mind, we need to delve into them, and these statutes that have been ordained and these decrees that were ordered. This does not mean to imply merely that a person should observe the chukim with the understanding that because of his limited intellect, he is unable to grasp the rationale, but he is certain that others smarter than him, and certainly God, who commanded their observance, have a rationale for them, although we may not understand it, and we should be able to be taught by Mashiach the chukim and the inner meanings, even as before we end this sicha, as we are in Ikvesa di Mashiach, the footsteps, the foothills, however that we want to translate this of Mashiach. This attitude does not constitute the true approach to the observance of the chukim. Observing chukim in this manner does not reflect the consummate approach to Kabbalah's ol. the acceptance of the yoke of God's kingship. Such a person has not transcended the limits of his intellect. On the contrary, his observance is motivated by his trust that the hukim, these mitzvos that we don't have a human intellectual grasp on and cannot understand, they embody such great wisdom that only a truly wise man can comprehend them. Although hukim should be observed solely with Kabbalah's old, when we do them, we just take on the acceptance of the yoke of God without making any calculations whatsoever. According to Lakute Sichos, Volume 3, page 815, it talks about this concept. This approach does not require the denial of one's intellect. On the contrary, one's Kabbalah soul, this taking on of the acceptance of God's yoke must have so much strength and vitality that not only does one's mind not object, but also his acceptance of the yoke of the kingship of God's kingship and his Kabbalah's all influences his mind and spurs it to accept this path. His mind should appreciate that it is necessary to fulfill God's will without wondering why. On the basis, we can appreciate the precision of the rabbi's wording and Rashi at the beginning of Parshas Sichos, because we do come to this fact in multiple parts here, and we'll be revisiting it soon. It is a decree. You do not have permission to question its observance. On the surface, the rabbi should have said, you do not have permission not to observe it. Why is questioning mentioned? It says the answer is that the mere physical observance of such mitzvahs is not sufficient. Instead, one must develop the thoughtful commitment to their observance to the extent that they resonate within his mind, and he does not even think of questioning them. This goes beyond the approach that a person who occasionally thinks the hukim are of no purpose should dismiss this thought immediately. To borrow wording used in Tanya in chapter 12, Tanya, however, speaks about a Bainani, okay, this middle ground of man, dismissing thoughts of performing a sin or failing to observe a positive commandment. There is no doubt or question regarding the truth of the commandments themselves. In the case at hand, by contrast, doubt and questions are raised concerning the merit of the mitzvah itself. This is similar to a lack of faith for those who were able to receive that. I'm not sure I caught it right there. It might have went right over my head, but others did. We'll have to come back to it. Regarding other concepts, the intent is rather to say that a person who observes chukim, these laws that don't have this rational, intellectual, graspable human intellect, although maybe somebody very wise could get properly, does not question such thoughts never occurred to him. Instead, he proceeds with a single-minded commitment that no one doubts about. Such a person observes a hukim without a rationale for his observance, not even relying on the explanation that God surely has a rationale. Moreover, his entire being is so permeated with simple faith and Kabbalah soul that this affects his thinking process, and he does not question. God forbid, his commitment has pervaded his thinking to the extent that no other approach even occurs to him. He doesn't question. According to this explanation, it's clear that to observe the hukim properly, one must arouse the inner dimension of one's soul. The third interpretation of Lifneihem, this Lifneihem yesterday is before them. According to explanation, it's clear to observe the chukim properly, one must arouse this inner dimension of one's soul. This third interpretation of the lifnehim that we mentioned above, it is this potential that enables the chukim to be accepted within the framework of our revealed powers, i.e. our minds, our feelings, and the like. Without the influence of this inner dimension, a person will not be able to reach the unquestioning, single-minded commitment described above. It is possible that in actual practice, he will observe the chukim with Kabbalah soul, but his observance will lack vitality. When, however, a person arouses the inner dimensions of his soul, he derives satisfaction and joy in his divine service that transcends the limits of knowledge. This enables him to fulfill the second interpretation of Lifnei him, to internalize the Torah's laws and make them a part of the way he thinks and feels with regard to Mishpatim, these ones that have more of a revealed idea, the mitzvos that we keep and can perhaps see a reasoning for. And even if we didn't, then we would learn it in another way. If we didn't, mamish, have the Torah to bring it down. These types of mitzvahs are logical and can be understood by the mind. Thus, a person will naturally derive satisfaction from their observance. Why is it necessary for him to arouse the inner dimension of his soul for the observance of these mitzvahs? It's like the Rebbe wants to tell us this way, so we already understand. And but so why then? And how can we this observance with Kabbalah's old, taking this yoke of heaven? How could it lack vitality? Why is it necessary to arouse this inner dimension of his soul for the observance of these mitzvahs? An outgrowth of the revelation at Sinai, number 3. We're almost at the end here, folks. The above question can be resolved by first explaining another statement of our sages on the verse. We're in the Exodus, in the book of Shemos, 21st chapter, first verse. And these are Ve'ela Mishpatim, the laws our sages comment. Shemos Rabbah Midrash Shenkum and Makilta, also cited by Rashi here. These complement those which came before. The Vav and this Ve'ela, the Elah, indicates that the Mishpatim comes as a continuation of and as a corollary to the Ten Commandments. For the Mishpatim were also given at Mount Sinai. Okay, as mentioned, it's interesting, this wording that it's saying this continuation and a corollary of this, like this vitality. Typically when you think of a corollary, I think of inside the heart. I'm not sure, there's like the corollaries, if I'm correct, and then you have the arteries, and the arteries must be bringing it in because the corollaries are like bringing it out. And this continuation, these mishpatim are kind of like our inner vitality and strengthening us, like we were still at Har Sinai, if I'm bringing this and seeing it at this moment. And once again, Mashiach should just be amongst us and teach us these terms, and we should have receive it right now, Ruach HaKodesh, and just understanding and your Yetzer Tov, should continue to guide you and just bring you closer and understand all things, receive it and believe it. As mentioned previously, in Lakutei Sichos, volume 3, page 888. And the sources that are mentioned there, the Ten Commandments represent a fusion of mitzvahs from both extremes of the spiritual spectrum. The first mitzvahs express the deepest concepts of divine unity, while the latter ones convey basic dictums such as do not kill, according to Exodus 20th chapter 13th verse, and do not steal, as we see in the 20th chapter 2nd verse, that are self-evident and can be grasped even by basic human logic. This fusions of the two in the Ten Commandments emphasizes that the observance of do not kill and do not steal must also stem from the awareness that they are God's commandments. They were dictated by God, the one who declared, I am God your Lord, i.e., this is God's, that was in verse 2. And it's saying here that this is actually God's very essence. It seems like some of the newer editions may have some of the previous editions may have a few corrections. No problem at all. We'll all work together and they're priority corrected. Another fact that was interesting that was brought out, Rabbi Yeye Wilhelm asked this morning in the Chumash class, and today's daily portion, the third section of Mishpatim, where it's talking about where we learn about the different ways that lending and the different liabilities that are different due to a person depends upon their amount of involvement and how much, if they're renting a car or you rent the horse, as opposed to if you're just watching the horse, or if they're paid or if they're not paid, which is a whole discussion. But one point is brought out. It was saying here towards the end of the portion for today, and the third portion for Mishpatim, that we should be kind to the ger. And Rabbi Yeye asked, he said, well, shouldn't we just be nice to the ger because it is nice to be nice to the ger? But Rashi brings down to the fact that we want to be nice to the ger because we need to remember that ourselves, we were once strangers in the land as well. And it would seem that the correct meaning is to just be nice, but sometimes we forget to just be nice. But we need to remind ourselves that we were also strangers in the land, and it would seem that we would not have to do this, but sometimes you're in the same spot for a very long time, and so you maybe forgot where you had come from. But none of us should forget where we had come from. But most importantly, let us all focus on the direction in which we are going, which is of the uttermost consequence to complete unification and elevation of all good things only in totality. Continuing along by saying these complement those which came before. Our sages are implying that the Mishpatim were also given by God on Har Sinai at Mount Sinai as a continuation of the all-encompassing experience of the giving of the Torah. They are part of the revelation when I, the only one who can truly be called I, this God's essence, this Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, this four-letter tetragrammaton, this all-encompassing godly force that transcends time, past, present, and future, and not affected by it, was made known by the Jewish people. As such, they also must be observed, not only because their observances make sense, but because they too were given by God at Sinai. We don't just not kill because it makes sense not to kill, or still just because it doesn't make sense to still. We do because God told us. This is highlighted by the first interpretation of Lifnehem. This before them. That dispute must be adjudicated before Jewish judges and not before non-Jewish judges, non-Jewish courts, even when the decisions of a non-Jewish court are identical with, I thought we were at the end, with those rendered by a Torah court. A Jew is forbidden to approach such a court because its decisions are not associated with the revelation of I am God, your Lord, this very essence of God's being that transcends time. Its rulings are thus not expression of the laws of the Torah, and every dimension of a Jew's life must be guided solely by the Torah and permeated by it. This is also relates to the Alter Rebbe's interpretation of Lifnehem as referring to the inner dimensions of the soul. The intent is that the study and fulfillment of Mishpatim as well should be motivated not only by human logic, but rather by the inner depths of the soul, as it is the study and fulfillment of these chukim, these laws that don't have a rational sense. Also with regard to the Mishpatim, the ones that make sense, one must labor that the mind's identification with them should not be compelled by human logic alone, but come as an expression of the inner depths of the soul. The Mishpatim must affect the full range of a person's character to the extent that they become part and parcel of his thought process. Also brought down Lakutei Sichos, Volume 2, Hosafos, Parshas Mishpatim, page 672. Based on the above, we're going to appreciate the interrelation between the three interpretations of Lifnehem and the fact that these concepts are specifically taught in connection with Mishpatim. Since Mishpatim are mitzvos, what can be comprehended by our minds, it is necessary to emphasize that our understanding alone should not motivate their observance, but rather that they should be kept because they too were given at Sinai. Thus, the Mishpatim also must be observed with Kabbalah soul and inspired by the inner depth of the soul, as per the Alter Rebbe's interpretation. Accordingly, is forbidden to bring disputes to the non-Jewish court. The first interpretation for their rulings are based solely on mortal thought, Also, although the observance of these mishpatim should be motivated by Kabbalah soul, the observance of these mitzvot should be internalized within our thinking process, which is the second interpretation through the arousal of the soul's inner potential. Number four, the drawbacks of relying on human intellect alone. Let's sprint through and make the final thrust here, please. Four, there are two reasons for not relying on human logic and observing the mishpatim, these, and therefore bringing the disputes before a Jewish court and not a Jewish one. Number A, were the observance of these, letter A, were the observance of these mitzvahs to be dictated by the logic, 4A, of our animal souls, there would be a tendency towards spiritual descent, as implied by our sage's statement in Shabbos 105b. Today, not the Yetzer Tov, I don't even want to identify this other one, tells a person, do this. Tomorrow it tells them do that, until it tells them go worship false deities. Chas v'shalom. My revered father-in-law, the Rebbe, explains in Sefer HaMamrim Contrace in Volume 1, page 37, Taurus Menachem 5710 and page 78, that at first not the Yetzer Tov does not have the boldness to entice a Jew to sin, God forbid. One thing we know is like the Jew are not going to turn 180 from Most High and turn towards sin. The process, what happens is we just get a little off track, and then as we continue to go along, then we notice when you look back how far you are off a center. Okay, so we have to continually be adjusting and correcting our trajectory. And if you go a little bit to the left, if you're kind of more of a person of Gevira, then adding a little bit of kindness. If you're more of a person of kindness, centering a little bit more towards Gevira and continuing in a beautiful elevation, because we know we're not going to turn like you don't walk up to the Jew, you want to sin. No, the Yetzer Ira is not going to convince us in such a manner. It's a much more subtle type of as we spoke about previously, when this folly enters us and just all right, in this gorish type of way that we are, that it's those of us who are like the ox, and the ones of us that are like the sheep and always going after our pleasures, and just in this in the mitten, just tie it all together right now. So my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe, explains that at first the Yetzer does not have the boldness to entice a Jew to sin, God forbid. Therefore, when it approaches him, it speaks about a mitzvah, and this is where it gets tricky for those of us who are Gerim, because in general, in typical, we wouldn't do something bad, but then as we come into the fold and receive this Yetzer, some of you never even not had the Yetzer in your life, or got it at such a young point that you don't remember. The Yetzer will tell you to do something holy to trip you up, which is a whole new level of just when the Jew wants to perform a mitzvah, the Yetzer tells him, do this, do what the Torah commands. But when a person fulfills a mitzvah because the Yetzer tells him, do this, i.e., because his animal soul deems it beneficial to do so, and not because God commanded him to do so in the Torah, he thereby severs his connection with God. From then on, it's possible for the Yetzer to entice the person to descend lower and lower. Tomorrow it will tell him, do that, and ultimately it will tell him, go worship false deities. So like when we get tricky, when we start doing good instead of godliness, when we start pursuing greatness versus Kabbalah's old for the creator, then our connection can be severed, and we can quickly be overcome by our ego. God help us all. So, but if we keep God at the center of all things, then, which is very hard, and especially as Rabbi YY was talking about, but don't also hurt yourself for all the wonderful things that you're doing in your life and bringing it down in a piece of bell gaiva. Don't go and cash out your 300,000, your $300 million bank account worth of mitzvos over a little nickel, dime, dollar, $50 bill worth of gaiva. Okay, this gaiva, this whatever you call it. 4B, and we'll pause here and then we'll finish later. Another reason The observance of mitzvahs may not be motivated only because of the dictates of mortal wisdom, is that even when the person actually observes the mitzvahs, his observance will lack a fundamental element, the awareness of the connection that stems from and is established with I am the Lord your God. The word mitzvah is related to the word savsa, meaning connection. A person who observes mitzvahs only because of human wisdom will not appreciate that this observance derives from and is an expression of the Torah's mandates, and that their fulfillment connects him to God. We'll pick up on page 332 when we return. Thank you for joining in. Yisrael Boykin, 602-338-0129. Be blessed greatly. Thank you for the time.